Unspoken until now, Jane and Casey had been best friends since they could remember, growing up together in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Maplewood. Their lives had always been intertwined, from bike rides through the neighborhood to late-night sleepovers filled with laughter. Today, they were spending a carefree summer afternoon walking through the sun-drenched fields that stretched just beyond the town's riverbank. Casey, with her wild, untamed auburn curls, dashed ahead, turning back to grin mischievously. "You're it," she called, her voice full of joy as she spun in a carefree circle, her hair catching the sunlight like fire. Jane could only smile, watching Casey's laughter ripple through the air. How had she ended up being friends with someone so effortlessly beautiful, so full of life? "Come on, Jane," Casey teased, her eyes dancing. "Don't tell me you're scared of losing? Big talk for someone who's about to get caught." Jane roared, chasing after her, trying to mask the fluttering in her chest. They soon found themselves at the river's edge, barefoot, wading in the cool water, their shoes abandoned in the grass nearby. The water barely reached their knees, and the warmth of the day balanced out the chill of the river. They splashed around for a while, the air filled with laughter until finally, they lay down on the riverbank, staring up at the sky as clouds drifted lazily overhead. Casey turned her head to look at Jane, still giggling about something her boyfriend, Adam, had done. "He's so sweet, you know? He said we should go on a double date. He has a friend you might like." Jane swallowed, her smile faltering. The familiar ache rose in her chest, one that she had become all too used to. She hated these moments when Casey talked about Adam. Not because she disliked him, he seemed fine, she supposed, but because every time Casey talked about him, it was a reminder that Jane's feelings for her best friend could never be spoken. "I don't need a boyfriend, Casey," Jane mumbled, forcing herself to sound playful. "I've got you." Casey laughed, clearly taking it as a joke. "Oh, come on, Jane. Don't you want someone to cuddle with? Someone to go on dates with?" she teased, her voice taking on a light, sing-song quality. Jane splashed some water at her, trying to dodge the conversation. "Stop it, Casey, you're too much. I'm fine as I am." But Casey wasn't one to let things go easily. After they dried off and lay down in the grass, Casey turned serious again, prodding Jane with a question she wasn't ready to face. "Jane, seriously, isn't there anyone you like?" Casey asked, her curiosity unrelenting. Jane felt the walls she had built up for so long beginning to crack. She couldn't keep dodging it forever. Her feelings for Casey had grown over the years, shifting from friendship to something deeper, something she had never dared speak aloud. But Casey was her best friend, and best friends weren't supposed to fall in love. Not like this. "It's complicated," Jane muttered, rolling onto her side, her heart pounding. Casey raised an eyebrow, undeterred. "Complicated? How could it be complicated? You're smart, funny, beautiful. Whoever it is should be falling at your feet." Jane bit her lip. It was impossible for her to hold it in any longer. Sitting up, she pulled on her shoes, avoiding Casey's gaze. "It's impossible because she already has a boyfriend," Jane whispered, her voice barely audible. Casey blinked, clearly taken aback. "Wait, she..." Jane's heart was pounding so loudly in her chest she thought it might burst. This was it. There was no turning back now. "Yeah, she," Jane admitted softly, her voice cracking with emotion. Casey sat up too, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Jane, you know I'll help you. Just tell me who it is, and I'll..." But before she could finish her sentence, Jane couldn't take it anymore. The frustration, the pain of hiding her feelings for years, all came to a head. In a sudden burst of emotion, she grabbed Casey by the shoulders, pushing her gently back into the grass, pinning her down. Why couldn't you just let it go? Jane whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want this to happen. Jane, what are you doing? Casey asked, her eyes wide with shock. Tears filled Jane's eyes as she looked down at her best friend. Her heart broke with the weight of everything she had kept hidden for so long. I love you, Casey, she confessed, her voice cracking. I've loved you for years. For a long moment there was only silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Casey stared up at Jane, her expression unreadable. Jane's heart pounded in her chest, every second feeling like an eternity. Without waiting for Casey's response, Jane stood abruptly, wiping at her eyes. She had said too much and now everything was ruined. She couldn't stay to see Casey's reaction, whether it was anger, confusion, or worse, pity. I'm sorry, Casey, she whispered before turning and running. Chapter 2. A New Reality. The walk home felt like a blur, the cool evening air doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside Jane. She had ruined everything. Casey wouldn't talk to her again. Their years of friendship, all their memories. It was all shattered because she couldn't keep her feelings to herself. The next day at school, Jane felt like a ghost, going through the motions while her heart ached. She avoided Casey, too afraid to face the fallout of her confession. But by the end of the day, she couldn't avoid it anymore. She found Casey waiting for her at her locker, her expression unreadable. Jane, we need to talk, Casey said quietly. Jane's heart raced, but she nodded, following Casey to the back of the school, where they could have some privacy. Casey turned to face her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jane, why didn't you tell me sooner? Casey finally asked, her voice soft. Jane's throat tightened. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered. You're my best friend, and I didn't want things to change. Casey was quiet for a moment, then reached out, taking Jane's hand. You haven't lost me, she said softly. I never knew you felt that way. Jane blinked, her heart skipping a beat. You don't hate me? Casey smiled a little sadly. Of course I don't hate you, Jane. You're still my best friend. I just need some time to figure this out. Okay? Jane nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over her. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but at least she hadn't lost Casey entirely. And maybe, just maybe, things could still be okay. Chapter 3. A Quiet Distance. The days that followed were awkward for Jane. She and Casey still hung out, still exchanged laughs, but there was an unspoken tension between them. Every time they talked, it felt as though they were tiptoeing around a fragile boundary that had never existed before. Jane knew that her confession had changed things, but what she didn't know was how deeply it had affected Casey. Casey seemed distant at times, though she tried to act normal. They still walked to classes together, sat together at lunch, and occasionally made plans to hang out after school. But there were moments, fleeting and delicate, when Casey would look at Jane with a thoughtful expression, as if seeing her in a new light. One day after school, Casey and Jane found themselves sitting under their favorite oak tree, the one they claimed as kids when they first became best friends. It was their spot, a place where they could talk for hours about anything and everything. But today, silence hung between them like a weight. Jane fiddled with the grass beneath her, her heart heavy with the uncertainty of what their friendship had become. She missed the easy conversations, the effortless laughter. Now she always felt like she was walking on eggshells, afraid of making things worse. Jane, Casey said suddenly, breaking the silence. She turned to look at her with an intensity that made Jane's heart race. We need to talk about it. Jane froze, her fingers stilling in the grass. She knew what it meant. She had been waiting for this conversation, dreading it. Casey took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you feel. Jane felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to nod. Okay. I didn't know you felt that way about me, Casey continued, her voice soft. And if I'm being honest, I've never thought about you like that. Not until you kissed me. Jane's stomach dropped. She had prepared herself for this, prepared for the possibility that Casey didn't feel the same way. But hearing it out loud still hurt. I get it, Jane said quietly, looking down at her hands. I don't expect you to feel the same. I just couldn't keep it in anymore. Casey nodded, her gaze softening. I know. And I'm not mad at you for it. I've been trying to figure out what this all means for us. You know? Jane swallowed hard. Does it mean we can't be friends anymore? No. Casey's response was immediate and forceful, surprising Jane. No, it doesn't mean that at all. You're still my best friend, Jane. That hasn't changed. I just need to figure out where we go from here. The relief that washed over Jane was overwhelming, but it was tinged with sadness. She still loved Casey, and even though their friendship wasn't over, it felt like something had irrevocably shifted. Okay, Jane whispered. I just don't want to lose you. You won't, Casey promised, her voice firm. I just need some time to process this, you know? But I want to figure it out together. Jane nodded, though her heart ached with the unspoken truth. She knew that deep down, her feelings for Casey wouldn't just disappear. But for now, she would settle for their friendship, for the closeness they still shared. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was enough. Chapter 4. The Shift. Weeks passed, and slowly, things between Jane and Casey began to feel more normal. They hung out more frequently, and while Jane's feelings for Casey still lingered beneath the surface, she tried her best to push them aside. Casey, for her part, seemed to be making an effort to keep things light and fun, avoiding any serious conversations about their relationship. One Saturday afternoon, they decided to visit their favorite ice cream shop downtown. As they sat outside on a park bench, licking their cones and watching people pass by, Jane felt a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in a while. It was almost like old times before her confession, before everything became complicated. Remember when we used to come here every weekend? Casey said, smiling as she took a bite of her ice cream. You always got the same flavor, chocolate chip mint. Jane laughed, feeling a warmth in her chest. And you always tried to get me to try something new, but I never did. Stubborn as always, Casey teased, nudging her playfully. For a moment, Jane allowed herself to forget about the tension that had been hanging between them. It was just her and Casey, two best friends sharing a quiet afternoon together. But then, as they were about to leave, something unexpected happened. As they walked back to the car, Casey hesitated, then reached out and took Jane's hand. The gesture was casual, friendly even, but it sent Jane's heart racing. She glanced over at Casey, trying to gauge her expression, but Casey wasn't looking at her. She was staring straight ahead, her face unreadable. Casey? Jane asked tentatively. Casey glanced at her, then quickly let go of her hand, as if realizing what she had done. Sorry, she muttered, stuffing her hands into her pockets. I didn't mean to. It was just habit. Jane blinked, her heart pounding. It's okay, she said quickly, though she wasn't sure if it really was. The rest of the walk to the car was quiet, and Jane couldn't help but wonder what that moment had meant. It had felt like more than just a habit, at least to her. But maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe Casey was still figuring things out, just like she had said. Chapter 5. A New Beginning. As the weeks turned into months, Jane and Casey found themselves navigating the delicate balance of their friendship. Jane's feelings for Casey hadn't disappeared, but she had learned to live with them, to keep them in check. She valued Casey's friendship too much to risk losing it. But there were still moments, small fleeting moments, when Jane wondered if Casey was thinking about her in a new way. There were glances that lingered a little too long, touches that felt more intimate than they should have been. One evening after a long day of hiking, they sat by the campfire, the stars twinkling overhead. Casey was unusually quiet, staring into the flames as if deep in thought. "Jane," she said suddenly, her voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot." Jane's heart skipped a beat. "About what?" "About us." Jane's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't say anything, waiting for Casey to continue. "I don't know what this is," Casey admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I want to find out." Jane's eyes widened, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Casey turned to her, her expression vulnerable. "I think I have feelings for you, Jane. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And I'm scared. But I don't want to be scared anymore." For a moment Jane couldn't speak. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel real. You do," Jane whispered, her voice trembling. Casey nodded, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know where this will go, but I want to try. I want to see what happens if we stop pretending this isn't something more." Tears filled Jane's eyes and she smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "I want that too," she whispered. And in that moment, under the stars, everything between them shifted. The friendship that had once been their entire world was still there, but now it was something more. Something deeper. Something that had always been waiting to be discovered. It wasn't perfect, and they knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time they weren't running from it. They were facing it together. And that, Jane thought, was more than she could have ever hoped for.